Man, you know that feeling when you walk into a room and everyone stops talking? That's the PGA Tour right now. Something happened behind closed doors at the Open. And it wasn't just one player losing his cool, it was 11 of them. 11 players united with a single document aimed directly at the CEO, Brian Rolapp. Now, this wasn't a polite suggestion or a quiet complaint. This was a formal ultimatum. But here's what makes this different from any feud we've seen before. This wasn't about one player's ego or a bad finish on Sunday. This was about the very future of the tournaments you grew up watching. Think of the Canadian Open or the Colonial. Those tournaments have history, tradition, and meaning to real fans. Under Rolapp's new plan, those events were being pushed aside, pushed into a second-tier category with smaller purses and less exposure. And that's exactly where the tension started to boil over. But the real clash didn't happen in public. It happened in a private meeting, behind closed doors. Sources say the CEO told one of the game's biggest stars to get with the program. That single sentence changed everything, because those 11 players didn't just walk away angry. They walked out of that meeting and started planning something bigger. They drafted a document that would force the tour chief to answer directly to them. The timing wasn't random. The Open is the biggest stage in golf. Choosing that moment to strike was a power play, designed to maximize pressure when the whole world was watching. Rolapp wanted to reshape the schedule, create 2 tiers, and make golf more like the NFL. But the players saw it differently. They saw their favorite tournaments being devalued, their history being erased. This fight isn't about money, it's about control. Who decides where golf goes next? These players didn't just complain to their agents. They consulted lawyers. They made sure every word was documented, because they knew Rolapp would try to brush it under the rug. They wanted a paper trail. And here's the part that keeps insiders guessing. Some of the names on that list will shock you. Others won't. But together, they represent the backbone of the tour. This wasn't a rebellion of outsiders. It was the heart of the tour, finally pushing back. 11 people stopped talking and started writing. But what exactly did they write? To understand why that document exists, you have to go back to the moment Brian Rolapp walked into the commissioner's office. He came from the NFL, a world where the league controls everything: the schedule, the money, the narrative. He had a simple mission: bring that same model to golf. Within months, he unveiled a plan that would reshape the entire tour calendar starting in 2028. 2 tiers. The Championship Series would be the big money events with small fields and massive purses. The Challenger Series would be everything else: smaller prize money, fewer perks, less television exposure. On paper, it sounded like progress. More star power concentrated in fewer events, better ratings, bigger sponsorship dollars. But beneath that polished surface, something smelled wrong. The Challenger Series came with a catch. Entry would be restricted. Only the top performers from the previous season would get full access. Everyone else would have to fight for whatever spots remained. That meant tournaments that had been on the schedule for decades, events with history, tradition, and generations of memories, would suddenly become second-class citizens. Think about the Canadian Open. Rory McIlroy won that tournament twice. It has been part of the tour since 1904. Under Rolapp's plan, it would be pushed into the lower tier. The Colonial Invitational? Same fate. The Phoenix Open? Also at risk. These aren't just events on a calendar, they're institutions, and the players knew it. Rory knew it first, and he decided he wouldn't stay quiet. Most of them kept their mouths shut. You don't bite the hand that feeds you, right? But Rory McIlroy isn't most players. He had been watching Rolapp's moves with growing unease, and in the fall of 2025, he let the first warning shot fly. It wasn't a legal letter. It wasn't even a public statement. Just a simple comment during an interview in Europe. Rory said, and I quote, "I want to play golf when I want to play golf." At the time, it sounded like a star player expressing his independence. But the golf media knew better. One veteran journalist, Eamon Lynch, immediately called it exactly what it was: a warning shot. He said if you're Brian Rolapp, you hear that, and you know Rory is drawing a line in the sand. That was the first crack. But the real explosion was still months away, because by the time the 2026 season rolled around, Rolapp's 2-tier plan was becoming more real. Players were starting to understand exactly what it meant. And Rory, who had always been one of the most vocal defenders of the tour's traditional events, decided he wasn't going to stay quiet anymore. The breaking point came in June, just before the US Open. Rory was asked about Rolapp's plan during a press conference. Instead of giving a diplomatic answer, he dropped a bomb. He said the Challenger Series was nothing more than a glorified Korn Ferry Tour event. For those who know, the Korn Ferry Tour is the development league. It's where young players grind to earn their cards. It's not a place for major champions or Ryder Cup heroes. That comment set something in motion. And Rory wasn't alone. Rory's public takedown of the two-tier plan was just the beginning. Behind the scenes, other players were watching closely. One of them was a man who needs no introduction. 15 major championships, the most influential player in golf history. Tiger Woods had always been seen as a company man, someone who worked with the tour leadership. But sources say he was furious when Rolapp dismissed his concerns about the game's traditions. Tiger started making quiet calls to other players, asking them what they thought about the direction of the tour. He wanted to know if anyone else felt the same way he did. The answer came back loud and clear. They did. By the summer of 2026, a small group had started meeting in private. They would gather in hotel rooms after tournaments, away from the media and the tour officials. They compared notes. Every one of them had a story about Rolapp dismissing their concerns. Every one of them felt the two-tier plan was a threat to their livelihood and the traditions they loved. The group grew slowly at first, then faster. Soon, there were 10 players who had committed to challenging the CEO, but they knew they needed one more to make their move truly powerful. That 10th man joined the group, but they needed one more to make it 11. The turning point came during a private gathering at a player's house, just days after the US Open. Over dinner, they laid it all out. No filters, no agents, no media, just players talking honestly about what they feared. One of them said, "If we don't stop this now, in 5 years there won't be a Canadian Open worth watching." Another added, "We'll be paid well, but we'll be nothing more than hired hands." That conversation changed everything. They realized they weren't just protecting their own interests. They were protecting the soul of the game. That night, they decided to draft a document. Not a letter, not an email, a formal, legally reviewed document that would spell out exactly what they demanded and what would happen if those demands weren't met. One of the key voices in that room was Scottie Scheffler, the current world #1, the guy who wins everything. His signature on that document would send a clear message. Even the top player in the world felt threatened by Rolapp's plans. Scheffler had been quietly observing the situation for months. He didn't speak out publicly like Rory did, but behind closed doors, he made it known that he supported the movement. He believed the tour was heading in the wrong direction and that the players needed to act. When the document was drafted, Scheffler was one of the first to sign. Scottie was in. Now the list was growing. Who else had the courage to join? Another player who signed was Xander Schauffele, the recent major winner. Calm, collected, but deeply concerned about where the tour was heading. His voice carried weight because he's respected by everyone in the locker room. Schauffele had always been careful about what he said publicly. He didn't like controversy, but privately, he had been telling his closest friends that something had to change. When the group approached him, he didn't hesitate. He said he was in. His signature on the document showed that even the most reserved players had reached their breaking point. Xander's signature was powerful, but there were still more names to come. The document was drafted in secret, but keeping a secret among 11 people is almost impossible, especially in a world as small as professional golf. Word started to leak. Not the full details, but enough to make the tour leadership nervous. Rolapp's office heard rumors that something was brewing. They tried to find out who was involved. They called agents. They asked players directly, but no one talked. The silence was deafening, and that silence told Rolapp everything he needed to know. This wasn't a minor disagreement. This was an organized revolt. Among the signatories were two influential voices from the player committees, Patrick Cantlay and Adam Scott. Both were members of the Future Competition Committee, giving them insider knowledge of Rolapp's plans. Cantlay had been quietly building alliances behind the scenes. He used his committee access to gather information and share it with the other players. Scott, the veteran Australian who had seen the tour evolve for 2 decades, knew the risks of Rolapp's radical changes. He had been around long enough to recognize a threat when he saw one. Both men signed the document without hesitation. 2 committee members on board. The rebellion was gaining serious momentum. Rolapp's office heard about the document but didn't know who had signed it. They tried to divide the players by offering individual deals, but the group had prepared for that. They had all agreed that they would not negotiate separately. Any conversation had to go through their lawyer. That shut down Rolapp's usual tactic of divide and conquer. For the first time in his tenure, he was facing a united front that he couldn't break. The younger players in the group were just as committed as the veterans. Maverick McNeely was one of them, the young voice of reason. He had publicly raised concerns about players losing control over their schedules. He believed the tour needed to respect the players' time and their families. When the group approached him, he said he had been waiting for someone to organize something like this. He wanted to be part of the solution. Keith Mitchell joined as well, another committee member who had been watching the situation unfold with growing concern. He had the respect of his peers and used that respect to help build the coalition. Maverick and Keith added youth and energy. But the veterans weren't done yet. Camilo Villegas brought a different kind of authority to the group. The experienced veteran had been on tour for decades. He had seen the game change in ways that both excited and worried him. He believed that the current direction was dangerous and that the tour needed to protect its traditions. When he heard about the document, he asked to see it immediately. After reading it, he said he would sign. His experience and perspective were invaluable to the group. Russell Henley and Tyrrell Hatton were the final pieces of the puzzle. Henley, a consistent winner who represents the backbone of the tour, had been quietly frustrated with the way players were being treated. He wasn't a superstar, but he was the kind of player who made the tour competitive every week. His signature showed that the movement wasn't just about the elite players, it was about everyone. Hatton, the fiery European, brought passion and intensity. He wasn't afraid to speak his mind, and his aggression on the course matched his commitment to protecting the game he loved. Henley and Hatton completed the list. 11 players, all united. So who were the 11? Let me lay them out clearly for you. Tiger Woods, Rory McIlroy, Scottie Scheffler, Xander Schauffele, Patrick Cantlay, Adam Scott, Maverick McNeely, Keith Mitchell, Camilo Villegas, Russell Henley, and Tyrrell Hatton. 3 former world number ones, 1 current major winner, the winner of the most recent major, and a mix of veterans and young stars. Together, they represented every generation and every corner of the leaderboard. This was the mainstream of the tour, not a fringe group. Rolapp received the document on a Monday morning. His team immediately went into crisis mode. They scheduled emergency meetings. They reached out to the players' agents. They tried to find cracks in the unity, but the players had prepared for that. They had all signed a pact that they would not negotiate individually. Any conversation had to go through their lawyer. That shut down Rolapp's usual tactic of divide and conquer. For the first time in his tenure, he was facing a united front that he couldn't break. The next few weeks were tense. Rumors flew. Some insiders said Rolapp was considering accepting the demands just to keep the peace. Others said he was preparing to call their bluff. He would suspend anyone who refused to play the new schedule. But suspending 11 players, including some of the biggest names in the sport, would be a disaster. Sponsors would pull out. TV ratings would collapse. The tour would be seen as a dictatorship. Rolapp knew that. So he tried a different approach. He offered a compromise. He would keep the 2-tier system, but add a grandfather clause that would protect the traditional events for 5 years. He thought that would be enough. It wasn't. The players rejected it outright. They said 5 years wasn't long enough. They wanted permanent protection. And they wanted the player vote to be binding, not advisory. Rolapp realized he had underestimated their resolve. He had expected them to back down once he offered something. They didn't. And that's when the situation became a true crisis. Neither side was willing to blink. The tour was heading toward a shutdown. The possibility of a player strike in the middle of the season was suddenly real. Rolapp offered a compromise. The players threw it back in his face. Now what? That's where we stand today. No resolution. No white flag. Just 2 powerful groups staring each other down. What happens next? That depends on 2 things. First, whether Rolapp can find a way to save face while giving the players something meaningful. Second, whether the players can maintain their unity when the pressure ratchets up. The next few weeks will be critical. If Rolapp tries to punish the ringleaders, the other players will rally even harder. If the players make a public statement, the fans will take sides. This isn't a quiet negotiation anymore. It's a public battle for the future of professional golf. Consider the history of sports labor disputes. In the NBA and NFL, lockouts and strikes have canceled entire seasons. Fans lost games they loved. Players lost millions. Everyone suffered. Golf has never faced anything like that. But this ultimatum brings that nightmare scenario closer than ever. If the players walk away from the table, the 2027 season could be in jeopardy. The majors could go on without the top players. The sponsors could pull their money. The entire ecosystem that supports professional golf could crumble. That's the real fear lurking beneath the surface of this conflict. The players know this. They're not naive, Every one of them has weighed the risks. They understand that challenging the CEO could cost them millions in endorsements or even their careers. But they've decided that the alternative, watching their beloved tournaments die a slow death, is worse. They're willing to lose everything to protect what they believe in. That's not arrogance. That's conviction. Rolapp, for his part, has his own pressures. He answers to the Strategic Sports Group, the investors who poured billions into the tour. They expect returns. They expect growth. They don't care about the history of the Canadian Open or the tradition of the Colonial. They care about ratings and revenue. Rolapp is caught between the players who want tradition and the investors who want modernization. It's a nearly impossible position. But he made his choice when he pushed forward with the two-tier plan without consulting the players properly. And now he's paying the price. The fans are already picking sides. Social media is on fire. Some are calling the players heroes for standing up to corporate greed. Others are calling them spoiled millionaires who should just play golf and shut up. The debate is fierce and emotional, and that's exactly what makes this story so compelling. It's not just about golf anymore. It's about power, control, and the very meaning of the game. Here's the bottom line. The old model of the PGA Tour, where the commissioner and the CEO made all the important decisions, is over. The players have drawn a line. They've shown they have power, and they're willing to use it. Rolapp may be a brilliant businessman, but he's never faced a rebellion like this. And the 11 players have already proved they're not afraid to go to war. For you, the fan, this is both exciting and unsettling. Exciting because you get to see real drama unfold. Unsettling because you might lose some of the tournaments and traditions you love. But one thing is certain, the game you grew up watching is changing. And this moment, right here, is the turning point. The decisions made in the coming weeks will shape professional golf for a generation. There's no going back to the way things were. One thing is absolutely clear. The players have shown that they are no longer just employees. They are the lifeblood of the sport, and they will not be silenced or ignored. Rolapp may have the investors behind him, but the players have something stronger. They have each other. They have a shared purpose, and they have the love of the game driving them forward. That's a powerful combination that no CEO can easily defeat. So where does this leave us? Right on the edge of something historic. The next move belongs to Rolapp. Does he come back with a better offer? Does he dig in his heels and prepare for war? Does he try to pick off the weakest members of the coalition? Whatever he chooses, the players are ready. They have their document. They have their lawyer. They have their unity. And they have the support of millions of fans who love this game just as much as they do. Here's my honest take. The players are fighting for the soul of the game. Are you with them or the CEO? Comment below and subscribe to see how this war ends.